Welcome to episode 3 of The Secular Buddhist. In the first fully functional Secular Buddhist podcast, we talk about why we're checking into Buddhism without its rich religious historical context. We'll also hear a segment from a recent Interreligious Symposium asking the question, Meditation, Buddhist and Christian, is there a common ground? And more. So sit back, relax, have a nice chai, and enjoy. Hi everyone, glad you're here, and even though this is technically being billed as episode 3, really since the first two are prequels from the podcast Atheist Talk with my friend Grant Steves, this is the inaugural episode, and as such I'd like to chat about what this podcast is. There are a whole bunch of perspectives out there in the world about the terms secular and Buddhism, and that complexity goes through the roof when you add the two together. Feelings run deep and fast, too, despite us Buddhist-y folks priding ourselves on being calm and collected. I was a bit stunned by reading reviews of Stephen Batchelor's Buddhism Without Beliefs on Amazon. There were people who were very much in favor of a view of Buddhism outside of a religious context, and others who were more evangelical in their review, which I found fascinating. How many of us Western Buddhist practitioners have a background where, for whatever reason, we found some cognitive dissonance with the prevailing religious practice? That we push back on folks who absolutely sure down to their toes of things that can't be shown, that are a matter of their faith. But we see the same thing happening in Buddhism. If you're not absolutely convinced of the truth with a capital T of, say, rebirth, you're not following the Buddha's holy path. The simple fact is that people have vast differences of what they're willing to accept and what they're willing to believe. Some of us are perfectly content accepting the idea of revealed truth in religion, others are not. Some find great comfort in the singing of hymns in church or the chanting of suttas at the local vihara. And while some people resonate quite deeply with the entire breadth of Buddhist teaching and practice, others are less comfortable with some aspects of it. Now, the reasons for that discomfort are pretty varied. It can be a cultural clash, as it was with me the first time I went to the local Zen center and a bald guy in robes answered the door. I got over it, and since he's become one of my favorite speakers. But there can be a cultural hurdle for a middle-aged white guy like me to overcome. And consider, I had no attachment to a different religious upbringing to contend with. There was no rejection of Buddhism on its own merits based on a perceived disagreement with lifelong Christian beliefs. I had none. Heck, I was even interested in Japanese culture and still had this speed bump to overcome. What I found, however, is a teaching that's rich, diverse, and practical. It works. It's empirical. Ehi passiko, come and see. You're encouraged to question, to put things to the test, to not accept this because a person of authority or a scripture says so. And even when you do find this to be helpful, even transformative, keep questioning. That appeals to the part of me that rejects fallacies of appeal to authority, but as there are Bible thumpers, apparently there are Sutta thumpers. Critics of this idea abound, even in our Buddhist practice of being open to questions, to testing things for ourselves. In the article, Secularizing Buddhism, Making It Accessible or Stripping the Roots, Vince Horn suggests that Western culture is very religious, which is true. I would respond that not only is that changing, as recent surveys show the fastest growing religious designation is none or unaffiliated, but it's not relevant. There are secular people who are interested in Buddhism that won't check it out because it's entrenched in religion. And while praising the rich historical significance of Buddhism as a constantly evolving religious tradition, there doesn't appear to be an acceptance of the secular application as a valid evolutionary path. Of course, we do need to be mindful, as we look at taking the teaching out of its religious roots, that we don't lose the essence, as Vince suggests. But as Sam Harris said in his article, Killing the Buddha in Shambhala Sun, quote, "There is a reason we don't talk about Christian physics or Muslim algebra, though Christians invented physics as we know it, and Muslims invented algebra. In the same way, once we develop a scientific account of the contemplative path, it will utterly transcend its religious associations. Once such a conceptual revolution has taken place, speaking of Buddhist meditation will be synonymous with a failure to assimilate the changes that have occurred in our understanding of the human mind, unquote. So this podcast isn't simply for Buddhists who want to hear a secular perspective. It's not just for secular humanists who are curious about Buddhism but don't like the religious trappings. It's for anyone at all who's interested in Buddhism but for whatever reason are neither interested in nor accepting of a religious framework. It's not to say that it's not a perfectly valid way of practice for people. It is. I continue to study with monastics and go on retreats at forest monasteries. But the teaching isn't reaching people who don't know that they don't have to adopt a lifestyle to get something very positive out of Buddhism. This podcast is about sharing ideas, regardless of one's attachment to or rejection of either religious or secular perspectives. There are lots of places for the religiously inspired person who's interested in Buddhism to go, far fewer for the out-of-the-closet atheist. Whichever camp you reside in, it's a big field. We can all camp together. In the fall of 2009, it was my honor to participate in an interreligious symposium at Bethel University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Bethel is a Christian university and had recently begun having practitioners of different faiths join in on panel discussions, sharing their beliefs with students, faculty, and staff. What follows is the first in a series of segments taken from the symposium that will be included in the podcast. The three participants are me, Ted Meissner, aka the Secular Buddhist, Paul Reasoner, who is a professor at Bethel University with years of Zen meditation experience, and Bhante Siwali, Sri Lankan Theravadan Buddhist monk and founder of the Minnesota Buddhist Vihara. By the way, be sure to check out the web page for Episode 3. I've included a graphic of the poster advertising the symposium that was used at Bethel, and have linked the entire recording on their site just in case you want to hear the whole hour plus.
Thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon. It's very encouraging to see so many people who have been ordered by their teachers to be here. So great to see you.
Maybe you should ask for a show of hands.
Yeah, thanks. I actually am going to ask for several show of hands. Probably the first one is something I would expect probably everyone may raise their hand on. How many people here have ever done something or said something that after they did it, after they said it, you went, dope. Didn't want to do that. How many people? For those who are only hearing this, that's everyone. Even our monastic has done that on occasion.
Yeah, many years ago.
Yeah, many, but a long time ago. I'm sure. And I think what Paul was just talking about with the hurts and the healing, that there are things that we can do, whether we do them in a having faith in God or whether we do them as an intentional practice from a meditative perspective, that can help us make better decisions so that we have fewer and smaller of those moments where we say, or do, or act in some fashion that we really wish we hadn't. What meditation is to many folks who approach it who are not culturally Buddhist, I'm a Midwestern guy, this isn't my background, is that it helps you in your practice, particularly if you have a regular practice, have a better control over what you're doing with your mind. And one of the Buddhist tenets is everything flows from the mind. What you do, what you say, originates in your mind. And so the practice of meditation, the intent behind it, one of the intents behind it, is to get a better handle on that, to see what's going on in our minds before we do that act, before we use that axe we have in our mouths called a tongue, and to make sure that the things that we say and we do are out of a place of kindness, a place of compassion, a place of mental equanimity. And what meditation does, when we talk about meditation, the first time many of us from a Western culture approach this, we picture folks sitting and the standard contemplating our navel idea. And what we're doing there really isn't quite so strange and alien as you may think. If you've ever had a moment where you've been sitting in a field or in the woods somewhere quiet, somewhere still, and things just calm down for you. That's what meditation is. It's a practice under optimal conditions so that when you're not on the cushion sitting, when you're just cut off in traffic, or your teacher said, hey, you have to go to the symposium, or someone significant does something you don't like, you're not as impacted by that as you otherwise may be. And so those, the techniques that Bhante Siwali had described, kind of the twofold, and there's two sides of the same coin. One is concentration, and that's just putting your mind restfully on one spot and not having it move around a lot. And the other aspect to that is mindfulness, the vipassana part, where you're able to kind of take a step back and separate yourself and see that those thoughts that are going on, they're just thoughts. They're not you. They don't make the decisions. That you make the decisions. And these two different sides to that coin complement each other so that your concentration reminds you, oh yeah, I need to be making better decisions. I need to do that not just when I'm sitting and letting go of thoughts that arise, but when I'm in my everyday activities, so that I know, gee, I should be doing my homework now. Yeah, let me do that instead of watching the game. That's what I need to do. Something else that Paul had described when he was talking about the Jesus prayer and a continuity of calm is Bhante Siwali and I were discussing on the way over here to talk about the different kinds of people who meditate. And I thought I'd do another raising of hands if folks don't mind. I'm going to ask another question. There are two very important requisites for folks to be able to meditate. And without these, really, meditation isn't for you. The first thing is, how many people here breathe? Pretty much everybody. Okay. If you don't have a mind, put your hand down. That'll be the other one. Okay. So if you breathe, if you have a mind, meditation is something you might want to try. There are different depths to which one has a meditative practice. The first time you sit for 10 minutes can be the hardest meditation time you have for the rest of your life. Because that's the first time you really notice, you really take a look at all the thoughts that are constantly going on in your head that we really just kind of skip over and ignore. But it's when you take a look at those, and that's when you're sitting, when you're in meditation, that's when you see all of them. And it can be very stressful. But as you practice a little bit more, and you sit for 10 more minutes the next day, and maybe 10 more the next day, maybe 20 a couple days after that, things start to calm down. And you get to a place where, during your meditation, you may have more times where you're calming things down, as Paul had described. And for people who have gone on with practice and do retreats where you're sitting for 6 or more hours a day and it's a silent retreat for a week and a half or so, and by no means should you start that way. That's really hard to do. There's even more transformation to what's going on in your mind, and you find that it becomes a practice. It's a habit that you don't need to put as much effort into. And you find that your compassion and your loving kindness and your having a better control over what you say and do is reflexive. It doesn't require as much effort. So it's It's important for what happens on the cushion when you're just sitting, putting your mind on your breath. That's it in a nutshell. To what happens when you get off the cushion. That's where things are really important. And for people who have gone forward, like Bhante Siwali and the other monastics, their practice is doing that off the cushion, that every moment they are being aware of what's going on around them. At every moment they're trying their best to have a heart and a mind of compassion, of love, of equanimity. So that's a nutshell meditation.
On the Facebook fan page for The Secular Buddhist, Christina Juskowitz, a fellow near Chicagoan, posted about the new organization Juniper as something that might be of interest to this audience. Juniper is, as the website says, carefully extracting the essence of Buddhist thought from the cultural wrapper in which we receive it, making Buddhist training relevant and accessible in modern culture. I'd particularly like to recommend that listeners check out the papers section of the Juniper website, which provides excellent information to someone with a secular perspective on Buddhist practice. You can find a link to Juniper on the Secular Buddhist webpage for this episode 3, or go to www.juniperpath.org. If you would like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com. Each episode has its own page with show notes, references, and links to source materials. You'll also find resources on Buddhism, critical thinking, secularism, and links to the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi. John Kaizen Neptune and Taihei Shakuhachi's websites are both linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment, every single moment, you have a choice. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.